Thank you everyone for joining me this morning for most of you. Again, my name is Dr. Tyffani Dent. Please do not hesitate to ask questions as we go along because we want to make this as interactive as possible. I know in this Zoom space, it's sometimes more difficult to do that. So today we're going to look at culturally informed support groups for Black women survivors with the focus being on the Safe Space Project, which is a curriculum that I developed that is free, that can be accessed through the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence. So let's get started. Okay, so again, I am a psychologist. I often call myself a psychologist for the culture because in the work I do, I prioritize the needs of Black women, girls, and femmes, and I unapologetically do that. I address sexual violence on the continuum. I work with those who have caused sexual harm, which allows me to do more prevention work because now we know we have some insight into what contributes to the decisions that people make. So we try to do prevention work in that area. And then I also work with survivors of sexual violence. And then I center again Black women and girls unapologetically. I tell people that when they ask me, I say, yes, I do this work because I believe Black women and girls deserve to heal. They deserve to be emotionally healthy as well. So when I came up with the idea of developing this project, similar to Sisters of Tamar, it was focused on Black women. Black trans women, Black cis women, Black women. So when I say Black women, I mean all Black women. So I just want to make sure that we are always clear when I talk about Black women. Okay. Warning. I have learned to let people know who I am. I am a Black girl approaching. I come from that perspective in the work that I do. Sometimes I will have people say, well, why can't we talk about all? And my thing is because I'm a Black woman. And at times it has to be okay when we are having conversations that we are specifically meeting the needs of certain parts of our communities. We are okay with saying we do gender responsive work, and we say that unapologetically. So if we are working at those intersections, we have to be okay with also saying, hey, this is what you're getting. This is the framework from which I will be operating today and operate most days. So I like to put that out there. So our goals and objectives, we're going to address the unique issues in Black women survivorship. What does this look like for us and how does that differ? And in that difference, it then helps us to figure out what does the work need to look like? Where does the emphasis need to be? Gain an understanding of the importance of culturally informed work with Black women survivors. And then we're going to talk about the Safe Space curriculum and its components. Again, it is when I develop curricula that are working with Black women survivors, those are always available through the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence. I have given them all permissions to disseminate it as they see fit. So I know at times when there is work that needs to be done, agencies, we don't have money. We not just be honest, a lot of us do not have unlimited resources. And then at times when we're working in agencies and we are working at intersections, agencies will oftentimes use that as an excuse to not focus on those culturally informed work because we need something that is more broad because we don't have money. And so in this sense, I've made a point that the work that I do is available through Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence. Rosa Beltre, who is the executive director, has been wonderful in her willingness to continue to engage with people, to work with providing the resources that I develop. The human trafficking workbook is also available through them as well as through me. And that is for teen survivors of human trafficking. So, okay. The timeline, the things that when it came to developing this project, the Safe Space Project, what started happening is we have this historical and current failure of victim services to meet the needs of Black women survivors. A lot of times within this work, we have consistently talked about it's gender responsive work. It's just about what does this look like for women and girls, and that idea of how healing looks different, how our community responds differently to us, the barriers to our disclosure, how we define healing has not been fully integrated into the work that we do. And so in that, in this project, I came from that framework of, we don't do a good job in providing the supportive services needed to Black women and girl survivors. And then we also need to look at this connection of accountability and mistrust of systems and survivorship for Black women. So when this project came up, we kind of had come in this framework of recognizing that, understandably so, Black folks don't necessarily are not as trusting, do not have as much faith in systems, because historically and currently those same systems have not done as well. They were not set up for our best interest. And we also know that disproportionately when we engage in those systems, we are treated more harshly. And then we also looked at the idea of, within our community, the role of storytelling and connection in what our healing looks like. So what ended up happening is that we'll talk about this request that came from a friend of mine at a rape crisis center who said, because of our system failures, we have this unique group of Black women who are coming through, whose perpetrators of sexual violence are still going through the legal system. And how are they navigating this system that we oftentimes within our community do not trust, understandably so, that oftentimes in our community we are told, please do not put another of us in that system. We don't feel necessarily supported within our community. And so how do we put all of these pieces together? And she said, I'm looking for something, help me find something. And so I said, I'll write it. I'll just do it. I will write something. I will put something together for you that you will be able to pilot within your rape crisis center with Black women survivors at the adult justice system, who are still dealing with that system as their perpetrators go through. And so then we'll talk about what the outcome looks like, which ended up being this safe space curriculum. So that's kind of this time frame. That's usually how I end up and stuff. If someone says, we don't have this for Black women, and I say, well, let me go ahead and make that happen for you. So historical, some of the things and we'll break kind of each of these pieces down. What slavery left many Black women is that our bodies are not our own. They do not belong to us. They never belonged to us. We were dehumanized because it's easier to justify and get rid of this cognitive dissonance of, we are great people, we are Christian people, but yet we are sexually assaulting Black women if we dehumanize them. They are not really women. They're not really people. We also are able to justify the sexual victimization of Black women historically by saying they are hypersexual. This is what they want. They're asking for sexual violence to be perpetrated on them. And then we also know that within our communities, we are also told we can tolerate suffering. We do not need healing. We do not need supportive services. We are going to push through. We are going to make it happen. We know that race matters within these systems. We know that historically and currently, people are more likely to be sexually victimized by those who come from within their own communities, because sexual victimization is a lot of times a crime associated with access. So we also know that race matters in those pieces of how Black women have been viewed and who is blamed when they are assaulted. Because we are family, because we recognize these systems, we also say it's not anybody's business outside of the community. And within our rape crisis centers, within our systems, one of the things that we push for is the idea of an advocacy is, let's get you involved with the system. Let's report this. Let's make sure they're held accountable. And so now we are the expectation is taking your business outside of the community, which we are taught you do not do. And then we have been taught we are just too busy to heal. As Black women, even if you have experienced victimization, you do not have the time, the energy to be able to focus on yourself. And at times when we choose to focus on ourselves, our community specifically will have not the nicest comments to say about us. Because when we say, I need to focus on me, I need to prioritize me, as we see, even recently with how the Olympics has done Simone Biles and some of the comments about her, when you say, I need to focus on me, the comments become issues of selfishness, issues of you need to just push through, other people are relying on you, how dare you? And so this is kind of this historical piece that we have been left with, that is this framework under which Black women who are trying to figure out what healing looks like, how do I move from victimization to survivorship, we are left with these historical messages. And then we also had caricatures that dehumanize us. The whole idea of the Jezebel, even further, like we took this from slavery and we continued it on with the idea of being sexualized, exotic, promiscuous. Some of these messages that allowed us to minimize the harm done to Black women when they're victimized, or or even to just blame them for their own victimization. And then when we're trying to look at this idea of healing, I love this quote from this student at Morgan State. She said, as a Black woman, I'm taught to be strong and not let anything affect me. If something happens to me, I'm just supposed to deal with it. And this was in a series that was addressing sexual violence, specifically at HBCUs, and how we don't support Black student survivors. So even in this, we are not allowed our humanity. And so we come into these spaces and we're trying to figure out, what am I supposed to do? Do I deserve to make this time to heal? How do I not beat myself up for not being strong enough to just get through this process? Or sometimes we simply forget. So this was on social media. And I love when Reagan Gomez was like, how many of you have watched The Handmaid's Tale? Raise your hand. I want to see, like, you also have a raise hand button. So if you've seen The Handmaid's Tale, go ahead and raise your hand. So Reagan Gomez says she doesn't watch it. She said, because I get why we love it. But enslaved Black girls as young as 10 were bred like animals until their adult bodies could no longer produce children. This happened in America. And so this idea of when people are like, oh my God, The Handmaid's Tale, this could happen. Like if we don't watch, we could begin to dehumanize women. We could begin to sexualize and assault women, and it becomes something that society says is okay. We've got to stop this before it happens. And yet, one of the things that we seem to forget to recognize, even when we're having conversations in gender responsive spaces, is this has happened to Black women. And on some level, society continues to support it happening, even if it's not within slavery, even if it's within the idea of not believing, excusing violence, sexual violence against Black women within and outside of our community. Or even if we don't excuse it, we don't prioritize it as being significant, as being that rallying cry to move forward. And so currently, most studies say Blacks are abused at the same rates as whites. But others say that we are abused, Black and brown women are abused are at an increased risk of sexual victimization. And part of it is the idea of lower socioeconomic status places you at a higher risk. And then there was also a study that talked about that when even the idea of when we get Black women in front of us to begin to talk about their victimization, there's a whole crew of Black women out there who are not. So even that first step to be able to kind of come in and acknowledge the sexual violence has happened, even this ability to come in and do that prosecutorial process when we've had the conversations about within our community, do we even tell? Telling is hard enough. So there's only 1 in 15 of us that are doing that. But then moving forward with prosecution is another step within our community that goes against what we're told we're supposed to do. And that African American women experience one of the highest rates of sexual victimization, according to RAINN. But then we have these myths that hurt us, that keep us at times from either disclosing, or that keep us at times from within when we're seeking services, these messages that the service providers are not working with us to actually dispel within ourselves, because a lot of times we buy into it. And that there's not just the idea of this person who harmed us is wrong. We at times will blame ourselves. So this idea of incest being normal in the family, Black females can handle sexual abuse, Black women and girls are sexual animals. This concern that for perpetration to truly be perpetration, it has to be by someone you don't know. Because if it's by someone you do know, then what role did you play in it? Because then it becomes you must have asked for it. And so some of the messages that Black women survivors receive from our community is the idea of there's no time or place for your problems. There's too much going on in our community. And when we're talking about specifically in this current moment, when racial injustice has been kind of amplified during this COVID year, or 15 years, however long we've been in COVID at this point, We focus on racial injustices. And when we begin to have conversations about gender justice, the issue also then becomes you are now separating the community because the one who is likely to perpetrate sexual violence against you is a Black male within the community. And so therefore you are not focusing on what is the true problem. We need to just solely focus on racism. We don't want to talk about sex. We have this discussion of within our community that actually talking about what healthy sexual expression looks like, what healthy sex is, full issues of consent is not something we talk about with our children. And then we also talk about boys will be boys. We have this tendency to encourage males in our community to have as much sexual contact with people as you can. Keep asking, they're going to say no at first, but you keep asking because girls are taught to say no. And so then we have these issues of pressure. I know even when I was in school, one of the things that we were told on the first day of freshman orientation was there was a certain dorm don't go to because you'll be sexually assaulted. And so the message to the freshman girls was if you go there, you know what's going to happen. Not if this dorm is known for sexually assaulting people, perhaps that's where the problem lies and that we need to do some intervention there. But it's this idea of boys will be boys. And so if you fall for it, you're weak. If you know that boys are going to try to get whatever they can. So if you put yourself in that situation, that's your problem. I went to a church one time with my lovely husband, and we were trying to find a church, and the pastor stood up and mentioned Mike Tyson and his sexual assault conviction and said, when she went to his room, what did she think was going to happen? Can I get an amen? And my husband looked at me and said, we're never coming back here, are we? We're not coming back here. I said, absolutely not. But there were people, women and men in the congregation clapping and saying it's true. Don't ask, don't tell. The idea of we don't ask each other about sexual assault. We don't tell when something has happened. And the idea that we exist for pleasure, violence against us is normal. And if something happens to us, again, it's our fault. The fact that even when we're talking about adolescent girls, we say stuff like they're fast. If there is a 30-year-old man looking at her, the conversation becomes, what is she doing wrong? So it's these ideas of who is responsible for victimization within our community. And I just love this quote from Surviving R. Kelly when they said, because nobody cares about Black girls. It is a message that we hear consistently. Even within our sexual violence world, we prioritize victims. And the victims that we prioritize don't look like me. We prioritize those that we feel society is likely going to relate to. Those are the stories that get the most traction. The fact that I know for me, I had heard since, I guess it was when I was in college in the 90s, that R. Kelly was abusing girls, that he was sexually assaulting girls. People who came from the Chicago area said, oh, when his album came out, they was like, he'd be at the high school trying to get with girls. Like everybody knew this. And it is what it is. It happens because one of the other messages that we get and that we fight against is the idea that no one cares about us in the first place. And survivor programs are not always designed with us in mind as Black women. Farah Tanis is one of the founders of Black Women's Blueprint that's in New York. She's now co-executive director with Savannah Brown. And she talked about it's not just the social circumstances, but also this code of loyalty. And we kind of mentioned that, this idea we don't go outside of our community and have these conversations. The people who harm us are more likely to look at us. It's also those expectations around what it means to be us, to keep our mouth shut if sexual assault happens, because again, access, it's very likely to be people that come from our community. And Black women, even though we have this conversation about intersectionality and being Black and women and how those two pieces together is 1 + 1 = 3, we still in our community are encouraged and expected to prioritize race. That is what we are told to do, that it is racial injustice that matters, that we need to align with Black men. And so even if Black men are the ones who are harming us, then we are not to tell about it, because then we are doing something that is harmful to our community. Because in the irony of that, saying harmful to our community does not apply to Black women. It's like we forget that if we're saying our community, We are part of that community. And the harm, if we're saying we're causing it to someone who's harmed us, but we're not recognizing that we need to stop the harm that's happening to Black women. For us, there are relationships that are extremely intimate because we know and we are raised, we are trained, we are encouraged, we are clapped forth, we are ride or die, that our job is to protect Black men and boys. So even if they're the ones who are harming us, and again, this is not about Black men and boys being more likely to be perpetrators of sexual violence. They're more likely to be perpetrators of sexual violence against Black women because of access. Just like white men are more likely to be perpetrators of sexual violence against white women because of access. But in that space of protection, when we're looking at these supportive services, those pieces, that insistence upon protection and loyalty and prioritizing race and not being engaged in the justice system, our programs don't often have those nuances in them or allow for that space to have those conversations. And so what we may want may look different, but our field does not permit it. Again, this mistrust of law enforcement and the legal system. Incarceration may not be what we want. A lot of times when we talk within sexual violence, we say accountability is prosecution. Accountability is no more contact ever. That's how we look at accountability. And at times, I know I was looking at some stuff by Aisha Shahida Simmons, and what is love with accountability? How does that look? And how does sometimes accountability not involve the carceral system because of our experiences with it? And then we have a resistance. We look at resistance to victim engagement with law enforcement. I was reading a study one time, specifically because someone was coming at me, which I always so enjoy, about, well, there's so many people report false allegations of sexual assault. Like there's these huge numbers. And so I looked it up. First of all, it wasn't even like 5%. But when you even looked into that, part of it was also who didn't return the calls from the police after the initial report. And they called those false reports, which is not a false report. To me, a false report is, you know what, I lied. A false report is then when you get, the DNA back or whatever, is somebody else and they come forward and they're like, yeah, I wasn't being truthful. To me, that's a false report. When you say you were not truthful, not because I didn't call you back, not because you called the number that you had for me and that number was no longer mine. But at times, we do have this resistance to engagement with law enforcement because law enforcement has not always engaged well with us. And so when you're saying, hey, you know what, this person's going to help you, really? When my experience has been, that's the last thing that this entity does for me in my community. And so what we may want may not be when you come in our faces as an advocate and say, we're going to go and file a police report. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. And then it becomes, well, there's nothing else. There's no other space for us, because that's how we have decided within the field that we frame accountability. And we also say that, the goal will be a no contact order ever. And then when we're looking within our community, it's like, that may not be what I want either, depending upon who is the person who is the perpetrator of violence. And then also within our community, if we prioritize not us, and we prioritize Black men and boys, who's less likely to be invited to the cookout? Me as the person who is the survivor of sexual assault, or the person who is my community views as more valuable than me? So how do we have those conversations, and where do they play a role when we're designing our programming? And our trauma may look different. Unfortunately, even in when there's been research with physicians, there is this perceived higher threshold that Black women are supposed to have for pain and trauma. Like they will say that we have a higher threshold for pain, which is not true. You just don't listen to us. And so when we have this idea of, oh, you can handle this, or, one of the most difficult things for me is when people are like, oh, Black women are strong. Are you serious? Are we strong? Or is there no room for us to be vulnerable and you don't make space for that? We are often told within our communities, because there's so much else going on, that we have to take care of everybody else. So we don't have time to look at what is going on with you. And then current trauma may also be intertwined with historical trauma, that we're sitting there and we're not necessarily separating this moment in time of my trauma from this generational trauma and messages within our community about who's responsible for sexual violence. Who do you talk to about sexual violence? Are we looking at you as being the person who is the fast one in the situation? We also at times will look at sexual assault and define it as it has to be a stranger. It has to be someone who fully brutalized us. If you didn't fight back totally and you ain't got a broken arm, you ain't stabbed the person, then you were not sexually assaulted. So having the conversation of, I was at a college reunion and I'm 19 years old and I'm a 19-year-old college student, and there are these 40-year-old alums who are coming back plying me with drinks. And I wake up the next morning and realize that I'm not in a room I recognize and my body is sore. We're not in our community going to call that sexual assault sometimes. We're going to sit here and say, well, what were you doing? What did you think was going to happen? And you shouldn't have went up to their room. And so it had to have been someone grabbed you, knocked you out, and that's how it happened. And so when we're looking at what sexual assault a lot of times in our community is defined as, in part because we do this, if you're 12 years old and the person is 20, you were just fast. That was not sexual assault. Even in this current climate, when we have these conversations about R. Kelly, a lot of times from Black women as well, the message is it's not the 14-year-old girl's fault. It is the 14-year-old girl's fault. It's not his, because what were you doing going to his studio at 1:00? I blame the parents. Like, we're blaming everybody because of how we define it, but we're still not calling that sexual violence. And so what do we need, as Black women? We need services provided in spaces where we are comfortable. A lot of times we set up things in spaces that are comfortable for those who are providing them to us. They're not in our communities. They are not in the spaces that we call home. Even when I developed Sisters of Tamar Support Circle, it was to be able to provide this service as a support group within churches. Within that community, the place where they felt safe. We need to incorporate healing practices that are culturally informed. What you believe is healing for me may not be what my community views as healing. I found when I was doing Sisters of Tamar, one of the things was we start talking about what is the music, what is that gospel music that you turn on that brings tears to your eyes, that you listen to when you're like, I need to make it through another day. That's what we need to incorporate into this process. When we're talking about the idea of prayer, what does that look like? When we talk about sage and crystals and yoga or whatever the case may be, are we incorporating those healing practices from that community into this process? And a lot of times we don't. We also need to understand that treatment needs to acknowledge our unique experiences and themes. Like, we kind of talked about some of that, but instead we don't. We instead talk about it's all about gender and it's about power and control. And those are the areas that we need to talk about, and not talk about systemic racism and epigenetics and the idea that trauma has already been passed down in my body from generations of racism and violence. That we don't talk about I also struggle with the idea that you're traumatizing me more by insisting that I need to engage in a system that doesn't love me in the first place and doesn't care anything about me. We don't incorporate those unique themes within the work that we do. And we need that. If we are truly saying we want to serve Black women survivors, we need to make sure that that's a part of that process. So when it came to looking at that, it was the 3 parts of this safe space support group. It was the ask, which was my lovely friend who said, I need something. It's not out there. We're not meeting the needs of this community for some of these same reasons. We need to provide them a space where they need it. We want to make sure that it incorporates these healing and culturally informed practices. And there are these unique themes of being Black women survivors who have actually decided, 1, to talk about it, which means you're unique in and of that yourself. 2, the likelihood is most of their perpetrators are also from within the community. And 3, they have chosen to deal with this carceral system, to deal with this judicial system that is a very difficult, challenging, and not always fruitful experience for them. and we don't have anything to meet their needs. So that was the ask. And so in that, I said, well, I don't know of anything, but I'm about to make something. So she and I had conversations about what this is going to look like. I started looking at some of the, doing a little bit more work in the research around trauma-informed work, and then deciding what are these components going to look like to make this safe space group. One of the things I am not creative with names. And so therefore, currently, as we're piloting it, we just said, we're going to call this a safe space work group. We don't know what else to call it. So if anyone has any ideas, we are totally open to it. So the ask, this local rape crisis center was seeking culturally informed supportive services for Black women whose perpetrators are still going through this legal system. They were saying, we've looked, there's nothing out there. And I said, I'll write it for you. So that's kind of how we got here. And then the development was the identification of themes in the victimization of Black women. We're talking about those intersections. The incorporation of various healing practices and the concept of ritual, because within our community, we have a lot of rituals. And sometimes people think of, even when it comes to things like when the what we call each other, the events we have. When we go to church, we know that you're going to have an altar call, you're going to have a benediction, you're going to raise your right hand to fellowship. There's all these different rituals that are inherent. Even if we are spiritual more than religious anymore, we still carry some of those ritualistic practices with us. And then we also wanted messages of resilience from other Black women. So within the idea of resilience and resistance, because I firmly believe that it's great to learn to deal with things that are happening out there and deal with them better. But we also need to engage in resistance because we need to begin to change those things that cause us to have to be resilient in the first place. So in the development, we recommended that this be a closed group. There are two types of group. They're open and closed. Open means that at any point in time, people can join. So first, second session, you may have 5 people. Second session, 2 more may join. Fifth session, you may have 1 more person join. And we decided that looking historically at Black women, the idea of a closed group was recommended because we are told not to air our dirty laundry. We are told you do not talk about family business, and family means our community business outside of our community. So automatically, when we disclose that we have been sexually assaulted, we have aired our dirty laundry. We have told our family's business. When we then decide to go forward and engage in the prosecution process, we have again aired our family's business. And those are not taken well within our community. So part of it was we want to be together with knowing that at this point, we are in community. It is not another time of every other time I come to this group, I am now having to go through that struggle of telling my family's business one more time. We also knew that we needed to be able to build trust. Because a lot of times within our community, our disclosures are not taken well by those within our community. It's don't say anything about it, don't put another Black man in jail. So the messages often we get are not supportive. And so part of it was we need to be able to come into this space and know that we can begin to build trust and talk about our concerns. Actually sometimes come into the space and be able to say something real negative about our own community, but I need to know that I can trust you in that space because we know that people at times will use our words to justify their own denigration of our community. Not having to rehash and retell when new members join, because having these conversations is traumatizing. Disclosure is traumatizing. So I always tell someone, if someone has disclosed, specifically a Black woman has come to you and disclosed their victimization, that is such an honor because they are putting themselves out there and experiencing that trauma all over again and trusting that in that moment that you will be a part of the process that helps them work through it. So the roles of support groups, and we did this, they've specifically requested that it be a support group. It did not mean that the women who were involved in it were not in therapy. They were actually going to be referred to the process from advocates and therapists. So this did not take the place of therapy. But the goal was they felt because of how our community shuts Black women down when we have this conversation about sexual violence, when we name our perpetrators, when we stand up and insist that we're not going to turn a blind eye and you're not going to let Uncle Tommy come to the family reunion and everybody's going to hug on him, knowing that he's the one who harmed me. When we put that out there, we are not always the ones that have that connection and are supported. So the goal was to connect with those experiencing or who have experienced similar same issues, to have a place where they can discuss those issues and they can be supportive of each other at times when there's no one else that they can rely on to do so, or not enough people within their community to do so. But again, what we said that they cannot do, it does not promise client therapist confidentiality. Even at the beginning of the process, in that first session, that is discussed. Because sometimes people don't realize that you can encourage it. We can all ask everyone to make a commitment to doing that, but it's unlike myself, who, if I violate that confidentiality, you can go to my board and I will be stripped of all my licenses. I can be sued. All of these things can happen. That's not the case for a support group. You encourage it, you talk about it, but you can't control it. And again, it does not take the place of traditional therapy. That was also part of the conversation in it, is these things can occur at the same time. They can occur after therapy has happened. You may start with here and then realize, you know what, this person also needs to benefit from therapy, and we need to begin that process. So we wanted to make sure that it was clear, and that the Rape Crisis Center made it clear. Do not sit here as an advocate, as a support, and say, oh, she really needs this because she's struggling and she's having flashbacks, so I'm just going to send her to the support group. No, you need to refer her to the therapist. And this support group can be a part of what she's receiving, but it does not take the place of. So one of the things we want to look at is ritual. A ritual is a well-defined sequence of words and actions designed to focus attention. It gives some level of significance and achieve a beneficial result. It meets certain needs in us. It's intellectually satisfying for us. It has some emotional pull for us as well. It has to have a strong beginning. So when we start in ritual, my favorite ritual is always the church, even though my parents will get on me because I ain't been to church in a while. I can blame COVID, but I wasn't going consistently before that. But in that, it's this idea of when you go in and they start praise and worship, it starts strong. And then at the end, we're ending in praise and worship. We're ending in prayer because it has a strong beginning and ending. And so in that, and it also has a level of comfort, because in a time of chaos, emotional chaos, caused between not just the sexual violence, but others' responses to the sexual violence. As we know, court systems don't happen the way we want it to. Those are often re-traumatizing. It offers some level of stability and comfort because I know what to expect when I come in here. I know where we're going to start. I know what we're going to do in the middle. I know how we're going to end this for the day. And rituals within safe space. We open with a check-in. It's the affirming that this space is our sacred space and it belongs to us. So at the beginning, there is usually a reading of the quote, an explanation of what this means to us, and then we have a part where we affirm that we are here to support each other. There's the part of the curriculum, whatever the topic of the day is going to be, what the next session is going to be, when is that going to happen if it's not already been established. And sometimes it may be established, but it's reviewed to make sure it meets the needs of the women in the group. Because as we know, in our community, we can say every Tuesday at 6 p.m. I'm going to this, but our community is not going to prioritize us. And so we may find that people are like, well, you need to take care of the kids, or we say that, or there's something else that comes up that we prioritize. So part of it is that review to make sure that everybody's on the same page when we can meet again, because if we start together, we want to end this process together. And then there's an ending affirmation, and the affirmations were written for the Safe Space curriculum. So I wrote all of those as well. The goal of Safe Space was this a Black women-centered space. And that is stated unapologetically. This is a Black women-centered space. It is not I am married to a Black person. It is not, I am the parent of a Black person or of a biracial person. It is, I am a Black woman identified person. And so it's a Black women-centered space. It is a place for them to discuss the ongoing legal process. It's not a space where legal advice is given, but just what is this process like for you? And that it is also made very clear that it is a healing space designed for them. It's designed with you in mind. Everything about it is going to be blackly black. And so that is what this is here for. And you are to feel safe, supported, not judged in this space, because a lot of times out in the bigger world in our community, people are questioning what we did wrong in order to be victimized. People are questioning, why did you have to put them through the legal system? Which for me, again, for Black women, is a personal choice. If that is what you want, you have every right to ask for that accountability. If that is not what you want, you have every right to not ask for that as well. So the topics, so here the topics in the sessions. The intro session, we talk about it being the beginning of the journey. We then have one that's called All Emotions Are Okay, which is this idea you can rage, you can have anxiety, you can have embarrassment, shame, whatever you feel. All of your feelings are okay, because at times we have this tendency to say what a survivor should feel. And if you don't feel exactly what we say you should feel, are you sure that you were victimized? If you were sitting here and you're engaging in self-doubt, we'll say, see, you probably weren't victimized in the first place, because you're sitting here talking about, well, I shouldn't have done these things. Because part of it is victim blaming is what society does to us, and we buy into it. Our community historically and currently will oftentimes blame us. And so when we start expressing some of that and that embarrassment, that shame, and that guilt, this session talks about all of those things are okay. Whatever you feel is okay. And then this is making sense of nonsense. And so it's these messages and these things people around you are saying that you just like, this is some BS, because we're taping. This is some BS, right? And then we have this idea of giving yourself grace, because one of the things that Black women often do not do, we extend grace to everyone else. We will sit here and we will accept apologies, and then everybody wants to post about our apologies. See, they're great because they're accepting people who don't even deserve it, apologies. But we don't give ourselves grace. And so this one is the whole idea of what does that look like and what is the importance of that? And then the next one is what the process for us. What are you going through at this point in time? And then my favorite is everybody is not worthy of taking this journey with you. The idea of what does true support look like? Because at times we are trying so hard to make sure that other people are okay, that we don't hurt anybody else's feelings, that we tiptoe around grandma because it was her favorite son who did this, that we end up tempering our own feelings, tempering our own needs, because we want everybody else to be okay. So this is the idea of everybody is not worthy of taking this journey with you, and that's okay. And the terminology is chosen purposely because taking this journey with you is a gift. It is not a burden. So it's that idea of worthiness. And then we talk about taking care of you, which is the idea of self-care. What does that look like? The challenges for that for Black women. And then continuing on, what happens as this process ends for us? What happens? Where are you still within the court system? What are your ongoing supports? What is therapy going to look like for you? What are the healing practices that you picked up that you're still going to use? What are going to be the signs that you recognize in yourself that I still need a little bit more? You know, or that I need to come back for something because I thought I was okay, and that it's okay to not be okay. Because sometimes there may be a new situation that comes up for you that re-triggers. And how do I recognize that within myself? So again, if there's any questions or anything, please stop me as I go.
Yes. Yeah, I'd love to jump in real quick.
Absolutely.
Everything you're saying is so like, I'm having so many thoughts. The comments in the chat are very much in like, wow, yes, exactly. Folks are talking about wanting access to this curriculum. I did a deep dive on the internet, could not find it. So if you could share that, that would be excellent. I did want to say, as an organizer, I tend to be very focused on system and institutional change and adjustment. And as you were talking, a couple of words and themes came up for me. The words and themes are Black exceptionalism, personal responsibility, prosperity gospel. So we're thinking about within the context of the Black church, I think there are some messages that make it really difficult for women in that situation, Black women, to really not victim blame. Like, even without dealing with direct shame, there's this like, God blesses you if you're doing the right thing, or, because we can't impact the society around us, you have to have control over yourself. Like, these are messages that I feel like, are so core to the Black church experience that, I think there's this institutional piece that I struggle with, because it's like, how do you even undo that in a group setting? What is our responsibility to doing that work within the faith communities and within family business? Because it's like, you don't want to have to undo that. Like, it's like a barrier,
And I know, like when we do Sisters of Tamar, which is faith-based, we actually have God only puts on you what you can bear. So we have some of the little sayings that the church does to try to put the responsibility for victimization onto Black women. So we actually, in that one, we actually interwove biblical messages. I engaged with my brother who has a doctorate in ministry, and he and I kind of dialogued on trying to find like these, because a lot of times, I love to tell people, Bathsheba was sexually assaulted. That's usually like how I start my conversations about things. But yeah, definitely. And I think part of that is in trying to, in this one, not somewhat, Sisters of Tamar is very specific in that piece with the Black church. But in this, we do kind of talk about what are these things that we hear that make it so easy for us to believe that we deserve what happened to us or we caused it. And that piece of making sense of the nonsense. What are these messages that have been out there that have been thrown in our face that contribute to these misplaced feelings of shame and guilt? And then part of it too is not passing that on, because we have internalized misogynoir. We internalize those messages and they show up here when we're trying to process and, in quotes, make sense, because victimization doesn't make sense. But when we're trying to make sense of our victimization, those messages are so woven in to our mismessaging that we put on ourselves. Absolutely. But yeah, that usually either makes a pastor like me or not. When I'm like, Bathsheba was sexually assaulted. Kayla, I see, has her hand up. I don't know if someone can unmute her for me.
I'm sorry. I'm a little confused by that statement, and I may be mishearing it. I actually have a survivor that's African American who I think everything I'm hearing right now makes a lot of sense of her struggle right now, because she is struggling really hard. And I'm hearing a lot of what you're saying, and I think this makes a lot of sense of her situation. But when you say that, when you made that statement about God doesn't give you more than you can handle, how do I mean, just to be frank, I struggle with that statement because it's like, that's hard for me to address, because I feel like that's unfair to say, because how do I address that? Because like, that's hard. Like, you've just been in a very vulnerable situation. And I guess I struggle with that statement. Like, how do I address that for someone who has a very close relationship with God and her, her unique connection? I guess I don't know if I'm making sense or if I'm babbling, but how can I make that connection to her and make that, I'm not trying to separate her from her relationship with God, but how do I make that make more sense? Because sometimes I just want to be like, bad things happen and it's not always God.
And I think the thing is that our community, a lot of times when we don't know, unfortunately, specifically in faith-based communities, they are getting better over time. And one of my things is I believe everybody should have an interaction with a Black woman in ministry, because it gives a whole new perspective. But I think one of the things that happens is that at times we don't value, coming from a missionary Baptist background, we don't often value professionals in healing spaces. We believe that faith is enough. spirituality is enough for healing and that we don't need mental health professionals, we don't need trauma counselors or whatever. And unfortunately, because we don't necessarily refer out, we go into pat responses like God only puts on you what you can bear. That's what the church gives us the message. And my response, right. So it's not me saying that, it's the message that the church says. And a lot of times we will put onto survivors, God only puts on you what you can bear. So I was like, let me make sure I'm clear for Kayla. Yeah, no, we're not saying, oh no, that's true. It's a lot of times that's the message that survivors are
because
given.
they don't believe it's like mental health resources aren't there. Okay.
Yeah, you can handle this, and you can handle this through faith alone. And my response is often, God has given people free will.
Okay.
And God is a source of our strength after bad things happen to us. But God allows people to make decisions, and sometimes the decisions that people make harm other people. And so a part of the healing process is definitely, if your faith is something that supports you in the healing process, we definitely need your faith, and faith that you can heal. And what does that look like for you? The other piece I often say when people say, well, I should just pray, I say, if you had cancer, your pastor would often tell you to go see your oncologist as they continue to pray for you. If you broke your leg, they would tell you, go get that fixed, and we're going to pray that you heal quickly. Though one does not negate the other. They can work together, and they should, because if your faith is something that helps you, we definitely need to look at what does that look like in terms of on your healing journey. But no, I don't believe that God only puts on you what you can bear. But a lot of times that's the message.
Gotcha. Yes, ma'am. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. We're working together. They're working together.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes, ma'am.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
No, thank you for asking, because I don't want anybody else leaving like, So it's always good when someone asks for clarification, because usually if one person is asking for clarification, there's another person who was thinking it and didn't. So thank you so much for that. So healing practices, and you guys will actually get to hear this meditation. I wrote an actual meditation for Black women survivors. It appears at the end of this. And so we do meditation as a part of this. We have art projects, because we have feeling cards that were developed specifically for this. And when it comes to feeling cards, you choose the feelings you have. On the other side of the card is kind of an affirmation or self-talk that kind of challenges what normally comes with that feeling. We do crystals and aromatherapy, because the location does not permit sage. Found that out. They don't do fire. You can't light nothing. We do Black women quotes activities, again, affirmations, and then there's a music as a part of this process. So we try to make sure we incorporate these different practices. Some of the with the affirmations, it isn't just that say it and it'll be it. It's this idea of call and response, which is oftentimes a big thing within our communities as well. So example, quotes, activities, meditation. Here's a quote from Making Sense of the Nonsense. When we start this session, these are a couple that came up. And deep in my heart, the answer, it was in me, and I made up my mind to define my own destiny. So it's this idea of, how do I make sense of this? The truth, it needs no proof. Either it is or it isn't. So it's this idea of, so we kind of start with some of these quotes at the beginning, and what do these things mean to you? And how does this, and how in looking at these from a framework of talking about your victimization. So this is an example of that one. For an activity, and again, in this one, giving up nonsense is what this activity is called. So in this kind of, for this one, the expectation is that a Black woman runs this group, because it's a Black woman centered space. So, and they give messages for them to say. So for the facilitator, she says, we all grew up in this world. We likely were also raised with nonsense about sexual assault and what women, girls do to make it happen, or what they can do to stop it. Let's write some of the nonsense stuff. I'm not going to say the word because you're taping. It's on screen though. Let's write some of the nonsense stuff we have heard and why we're not owning that. So we write on the flip chart, she actually writes nonsense stuff about sexual assault that we are not going to own. And so they kind of talk about some of these messages that we have been told about this. And then we talk about, which of these things have people said to you? Which of these things have you believed about yourself in this process? What do you need from each other and from us to kind of help you fight this? Because sometimes it's not just what you've heard, it's also preparing you, because as you disclose more, one of the things we know is that you're likely going to hear some more of the nonsense. It's likely, even if you haven't heard these 5 and you sit there like, I ain't heard them. Sis, I promise you're going to hear at least one. And someone's going to be saying it about your experience. So part of it is also preparing, addressing the ones you've heard. And how do we process and support each other and recognize that those aren't true? And at the same time, there's going to be some that you haven't. But how do we address that? Because if you come across them, then you can leave them like, this some more of that nonsense. That mess that we've been talking about. And so affirmation, this is from that as well, because they actually say these things out loud, that I will not buy into the nonsense. I will not allow those around me to blame me for my assault. I am working to survive something that I did not deserve happening to me. I will remind myself that the nonsense is just that, nonsense, and I refuse to own it. So this is a part of the curriculum. So these are like kind of examples of the things that we do within the curriculum, and they're all written out to kind of help the facilitator guide that process. So here's the meditation. I think I'm running really early. Oh, that's not good, but we'll ask questions. So we're going to do the meditation. It takes several moments. So I can't mute myself, so I'm just going to have to be really quiet, because if I mute myself, you won't hear it, is what I found. Okay, so this was written specifically for this curriculum by me. The music was done by Sax B. He's a saxophonist who wrote the music for this. So we take this moment to breathe, to try and reclaim our bodies that were taken from us, to find safety within our own skins, within our minds, again, because we deserve nothing less than this moment of peace, this chance to be centered with fear, anxiety, or misplaced shame. We place our hands on our hearts to hear the beating, to remind ourselves that we are alive, to understand that there is still love there. Breathe in, breathe out. Stay centered in this time as we reclaim agency over our bodies, over our lives. Breathe in, breathe out. Take this time to remember a moment of joy before the pain, because moments of joy are healing. Remembering moments of joy allow us to continue to know they are again possible. Breathe in, breathe out. Breathe in connection to self, your supports, and pursuit of justice. Breathe out hurts, misplaced guilt, because we own this moment, regardless of what was taken. No matter what we are trying to release. Breathe in, breathe out. When we speak it, it becomes truth. Say, I work to continue my healing journey. I surround myself with those who support me. I remove those who seek to harm me. I seek to reconnect with the parts of me that were taken. I take in healing. I release trauma. I take in joy. I release pain. Ashe. So that is an example of some of the parts of the curriculum. All of that is provided. If people want the meditation, I'm going to send it to Courtney, so I ain't responsible. But I can definitely send that to you. Again, that was Saxby, a saxophonist, who did the music to that. So part of the whole process is that the goal is to incorporate all of these different practices, and everything was specifically designed with Black women in mind. So where are we at this point? It is currently being piloted by a rape crisis center in Ohio. So I've been asking them, give me feedback as you go through this process. Everything is copywritten, but at the same time, just like anything else, you can do revisions. So we're trying to see what are the pieces that we're missing, because sometimes you think you have all the pieces, and then there's a topic that comes up. Like when I did the one for, when I was initially doing the one for Sisters of Tamar, one of the questions that came up was sex. The idea of, you say the marriage bed is not defiled, and yet now if the sexual assault, I'm realizing it affects intimacy. And so what does that mean for me as a Christian woman who's supposed to be able to enjoy intimacy with my partner? I had this sexual assault. I've now done this Christ-like ordained relationship, and I realize it's still harmful. So we hadn't included that at first. And then it got brought up. And so we added a session that talked about the marriage bed is never defiled. And what does intimacy now look like? How do you communicate with your partner? And so it will be made available to others via, again, the Ohio Alliance to End Sexual Violence. So that's kind of where we are. I do want to open for questions and comments. These are the people who have been a part of this process for me, who have reviewed it, who have offered inputs, as we have kind of gone through and figured out. And I was like, okay, I came up with this. And I would send it in like, what about this? So these are the people. And again, my favorite saxophonist of all time, Saxby, who's my nephew. When I decided to do the meditation, he met with me. We recorded it together. He decided what the music was going to look like that goes under it. Because again, we also know within our community, there's this connection to music that is oftentimes found when we are trying to do healing, whether it's the beating of the drums, whether it's gospel, whether it's jazz, whatever the case may be. For me, sometimes it's hardcore rap because I need to cuss a bit. Whatever it looks like, that a lot of times music plays a role in what that looks like for us. So he was so gracious to be willing to do that for me. This is the best way to connect with me. That's my email address for questions. Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, I'm at Dr. Tyffani. I will say that I am very political in my social media. I am very much about, when I write my blogs, it is really about centering Black women and girls and what that looks like in terms of society. And then for Facebook, Sisters of Tamar has its own Facebook page, and then I do a video cast with two other amazing Black women twice a month on Wednesdays, and that's found at Centering Sisters, where it's called a video cast for Black women by Black women. So that's kind of the best ways to find out what is going on with me. So I did want to see if there's questions or comments. Crystal has her hand up, it says.
All right. So I have a few questions.
Okay, absolutely.
I'm working on my doctorate right now in public health, and one of my main areas of study is the abuse to prison pipeline and health outcomes for Black and brown women. So I just read, or I just did a lot of research on Girl Interrupted and the adult.
Okay.
So
yes, Georgetown Study and African American Policy Forum, Monique Morris.
Yep. I was wondering, A, you were familiar with the research, and B, if you could talk a little bit about, because the findings were Black girls are experiencing this as early as preschool.
Yes.
This idea that they can, just kind of pull themselves up. And so I was wondering if you could talk about that a little bit and how your group deals with that. So
and I think adultification is the idea of Black girls as young as 5 are viewed as needing less nurturing, needing less support, that they have more knowledge about sexual matters. And when you add all of those things together, and that was not just from white folks believing that, it was also some of the respondents who believe that were also from our own community. So this was not, only white people think that Black girls, no, we were saying the same thing. And so part of it, when we're looking at the knowing more about sexual matters, part of that is kind of that nonsense messaging. What are the things, because that's how we can blame you. If you were sitting here and you were victimized by someone who was much older, we call you fast. We say that you was putting yourself out there. What was they supposed to do? So we're able to kind of send that message of you knew what you were getting into. We also know that a lot of times, people are not victimized once. It's for some reason, with victimization, you may have multiple perpetrators. And sometimes we may have women who were victimized when they were younger. And part of that messaging too is that idea of you knew exactly what you were getting into. So in the kind of talking about the nonsense, we want to talk about that. The idea of leading less nurturing and support, pieces of that are in giving yourself grace. Part of it is that who can take this journey with you? Because of this, you deserve support. You deserve to have people to care about you and nurture you. And there's this expectation that you push through and handle it, that you sit here and because this was, you're somebody who, in our community, we have relationships that are not necessarily based upon DNA, but this was your cousin because y'all grew up together who sexually assaulted you. Everybody wants to focus on how you have to make sure he's okay and not engage in the carceral system because you will be fine. And so we have those conversations about you deserve support, you deserve nurturing, you deserve to prioritize yourself. But yeah, I love the work by Georgetown. Dr. Monique Morris, I know her personally. She's amazing. Her second book was Senior Rhythm, Senior Blues, I think is something like that, but where she talked about some actual resources to combat some of those issues that Black girls are facing. But I encourage people to read the Georgetown study. African American Policy Forum has some great stuff going on, and definitely the books by Monique Morris are awesome as well.
Did you get a glimpse of my living room table? Because all those books are there right now.
I didn't. I missed it. Was there any other questions or comments from anyone?
Yes. So I think just coming back to the conversation about the criminal legal system and the real issues in that system, I often feel like there are folks that in the movement think of the distrust as kind of irrational. Even the way that it's framed, people will be like, well, she seems to not want to, talk to police, and almost like it's a benign kind of like, okay, maybe she just needs to be educated or meet the right police officer. Maybe if we connect her to someone in victim services, she'll feel differently. I've had, when I used to do hospital accompaniment, I've had SANE nurses talk to Black women and be very, well, I think it's best for you to do this. And almost like there's not an understanding and a recognition of the history that exists. So I'm wondering for service providers, and think about like allyship also, how do we, get people to understanding the institutional betrayal that exists for the criminal justice system in different ways, whether you're a victim or you're talking about not wanting to add to mass incarceration. I feel like that is not, it's not, I think people don't really get it. It doesn't sink in for very many people. So I don't know. I don't even know if that was a question, but I definitely feel like the experience has been, I've seen it as an advocate and as a Black woman, just like this kind of dismissal of concerns about those institutions.
And I agree. I think one of the things that happens, it's a very privileged position to believe that systems are there to assist you. Because a lot of times in that privilege, the systems are. The more historically excluded and marginalized you are, the less likely that system was designed to help you. And sometimes I don't believe that it's a lack of knowledge. I think it's a disbelief in our reality. And that is very harmful to survivors, because I do believe that most people, especially in this moment in time, it's not the first time that people are hearing that our communities have a distrust of systems. It's just, I don't believe that your distrust is rational, because that's not been my experience, or there are some good ones out there and you just need to meet a good one. But it's not this is not individuals. Systems is a system. And so me meeting one person who may be nice to me does not mean that I'm not going to continue to be engaged with this system that has a tendency to not prioritize my victimization, to already want to provide harsher consequences when someone has done something, when someone in my community does the harm. Let's call it that, because it's not about me and my victimization and you viewing them as deserving more because you prioritize me as a victim. It's more so because of how you view them as a perpetrator and your willingness to give them harsher consequences. So I think the struggle sometimes is also, I think some of it's education, but I think when we say that, we then allow for lack of accountability of those who choose, no matter how many lovely workshops you put them through, to just say, I don't believe your experience because it's not mine. And one of the things I find interesting about that is because a lot of times in these gender spaces, where the focus seems to be widely on women and girls, not solely, but widely. One of the reasons that we had these spaces because we felt that the other ones did not truly take into account our needs or our reality. But yet, even within these spaces, we then say, well, if my experience as a white cisgendered woman is this, then your experience as a Black trans woman is this, or as a Black woman should be the same as mine, because it's all about gender, but we leave out those other pieces. So sometimes, do I believe it's education? Yes. Sometimes, do I believe certain people cannot deal with people within our community because you just choose to not believe us? That's true as well. And I think that, to me, if we are talking about the idea of power and control, the power for a victim, for someone who's moving towards survivorship, is healing looking like, and accountability looking like what they say that it wants to look like. So if we are truly about empowering the people that we work with, we go to what they want. And sometimes we sit there and, in our saying we're educating, we're not really educating you. We're telling you that you're wrong and what you want doesn't make sense. And is that truly trauma informed? Is that truly victim-centered work? Or is that our privilege showing? So, no. See, that's why I put caution Black girl at the beginning, because it's this type of stuff that gets me into trouble. Are there any other questions or comments that anyone has? I want to make sure that I answer any of those. And again, I will put in the chat, because I told Rosa was coming. I'm going to see if I can do this.
Lots of great shout outs for the great resources put out by Crystal. Thank you. Mm-hmm. All that great data.
Yeah, it's and I also, if you want a list of some of those, I can just kind of do a what is it called, a resource dump to you, Courtney, because I do have a lot of the articles and stuff that Crystal, the books, got to purchase them.
Go for it. I also already got a request for the meditation, so
okay. That's fine. I'll get that.
Send me the things and I will send it on to our conference crew to get out to folks.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Is there anything else that anybody had any questions about the curriculum or any of the resources that were mentioned? Okay. I guess I can turn it back over to Courtney if no one has any questions. I know we ended this is the first time I've ever ended a couple minutes early. I'm so proud of myself. Normally I'm like,
and it was
only because I'm like holding in all of my thoughts and just wonderful feelings about your talk. It's been just such a great experience, and I'll pass it on to Courtney.
Oh, that was great, Amanda. Same sentiments. without being able to provide the same words. But yes, that was wonderful, Dr. Dent. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone who attended the talk. A lot of love coming in through the comments for you, Dr. Dent. Y'all be sure to complete the survey because, you know, I know that this session was amazing, but we also want to hear y'all's thoughts and then pass them along. Yeah. Any final things? I can't remember if there was more. Yes. Oh, and don't forget to do the conference evaluation at the end of the conference, and you'll be entered for a chance to win a ticket to the 2022 conference. Oh, yay. Folks, we'll be in touch with you, Dr. Dent. I don't know if you're seeing all this. It's great.
And if you're asking me something that's general or like resources or whatever, absolutely. If it's something that you only want me to read, please put that it's personal in the subject line as a part of it, because Mia does check that email account more than I do. So I want to honor. She will not open anything. If she gladly will not open anything if it says that it's specific to me. But if it's just a general inquiry about something, about a resource or whatever, she opens all of those. So, and will communicate with me on every couple days to make sure I sit down and respond. So thank you so much. I appreciate it, everybody.
Thank you.
A quick question.
Oh, okay.
So I love everything that you taught us about today. However, in my agency, we don't have any Black women that could run this kind of a group right now. We don't have any Black women therapists. And currently I run our sexual assault group, and I'm very aware of how often we have women, Black women in the group. And, I'm curious if you have any suggestions about how I could best.
Oh, you're a Black woman.
Is that you, Bianca? Go ahead. You said, do we have any suggestions about what specifically?
Just so I how I can support them, in this space of like, I would really like to best support them. I realize that I can't change the fact that I'm a white woman. So I'm just curious if you have any suggestions about how I can better make that space available to our Black women survivors.
My first thought was definitely what Bianca said. That's why I laughed a little bit. I think my struggle at times is within our agencies. I had a woman one time who told me when I said that they needed to be intentional about having more Black and brown women providing services to survivors, not just as case managers, but also as therapists, also as administrators, supervisors who were kind of determining what the programming would look like and prioritizing what that looked like. She told me she was offended. How dare I? And I said, well, if you had a woman who came to you and said, I don't want to meet with your coworker, Matt, I really need a woman therapist. She said, that's different. And I said, it's different because one of those oppressions matters to you. One of those things you feel yourself. So all of those things need to be taken into consideration. Unfortunately for Black women, unfortunately for historically excluded communities, Black, Indigenous people of color, we have been forced that if we want to receive any support, that we have to receive it from people who are not fully knowledgeable about our intersections, about our identity, and we do the best that we can. I do believe in organizations need to be intentional, whether it's in your hiring practices, in your internships. I find it interesting in Ohio, we have 2 historically Black colleges that actually have social work programs, and yet no one can find interns of color to do mental health services. That for one, we need to be very intentional about making sure that we make sure that we have women providing services in gender responsive spaces. We need to be, because we know that it's important for our clients to see people who are like them, but then we also must look at those other intersections. I think you do the best that you can. You also ask your agency, why is this? Why don't we have people who look like our clients, who come from the communities our clients coming from, providing services. You acknowledge your limitations. I do not give this curriculum to organizations who say that we're going to have someone who is not a Black woman running it, because it's not designed for that. But I do always say, if you're working with clients of color, acknowledge the fact that you do not fully understand the experiences that they're going through. Do not do the everybody but me. I'm not like that. Listen, affirm their experiences. Find other resources that may not be within your agency that may also be healing and supportive for them. It's not always therapy. Sometimes there's other things that are happening in the community that may be helpful, and know that you're not going to be able to give them, none of us can give everybody everything that they need, but we also know that there are pieces of it that we have to acknowledge to them and to ourselves that we may not be capable of doing. So that's kind of how I operate.
That was amazing. I can only add on to what you just said. I think we had a similar issue with a similar request from another organization. And what they ended up doing is partnering with an organization that serves the Black community in their area to do group on site at their location, and then hired someone to do that group work. So that, I mean, that's an opportunity. Of course, we have SASP and we have some funding opportunities to provide that kind of services if you're looking for resources. But I think, just to piggyback on what Dr. Dent is saying, if you can't keep Black staff, you know, because yeah, that's a question, right? Like that's a, you know, if you can't keep Black staff, if Black people aren't coming in to do interviews, you know, we got an unofficial communication strategy, right? If I'm a Black woman looking for a job and I'm like, do I want to work there? And I hear through the grapevine that it's not a good experience for me, or they're not serving my people, I'm not going to work there. So there's also work around bridge building and communities of color to ensure that we're actually a safe place to work. And then it can be a safe place for communities, for Black women to seek services.
And I think, Amanda, one of the key words you said was pay. Because one of the things we also need to do is we need to pay Black women for their emotional and intellectual and professional labor. Because what will happen is that we will partner with these organizations. And because a lot of times organizations who are Black women serving, this is our passion project. This is our servicing our community. And we will at times ask them to partner with us where they are not receiving the resources that they need to do the work, because we're retaining them for ourselves, but we know that they'll do it because they want the community to be reached. And I'm sitting here as a person who gets in trouble for that, because as I said, I did this for free. You know, I developed the whole curriculum and said, just go ahead and use it. But that's part of the issue too, is at times we also have to be when we're partnering with the organizations that are already doing this work, and we're saying we're going to offer resources and training and support, we also need to offer them pay. Because we can sit here and say all day that pay doesn't matter, because we in social services, so it ain't mattering as much as it do to other people. But at the same time, we also know that as a society, we show our valuing of something by the money we put to it. And a lot of times when we're looking at programming for historically excluded and marginalized communities, we suddenly don't have the money to pay for these things, which is why Rosa gets on me about talking about stuff is for free. So I'm saying it's free. Rosa may tell your agency, she may look up the budget and be like, but you pay for everything else. And so sometimes it is about the idea of, are you not just requesting, but are you also putting your financial support to show we value this partnership with your organization? It's not just training your therapist to do this specific work. It's not just doing that as we seek for people to work within our own agency and make it safe for Black, Indigenous people of color to be in that space, but that we also are saying that we are going to provide you the financial support to really show that we value this as an organization. So pay Black women. #.
And that's on Mary Had a Little Lamb. Thank you.
I was about to say, Dr. Dent ending with dropping truths. Going full circle back to the coffee chats this morning when Rose discussed, how are you investing in your people? How are you investing in your organization? Yes, all of that. All right. Y'all, that was wonderful. Dr. Dent, thank you so very much.
Welcome. Thank you guys for having me. I so appreciate you guys spending your morning, or is it afternoon for y'all now? Morning into afternoon with me.
It's we're right at noon.
Have a good one, everybody.
Yes, y'all go enjoy your lunch. We'll catch you at 1:30 at the next sessions.
Bye.
I'll play y'all out.
Allow and be open. Begin with one step, moment to moment. Envision the journey, your process. Allow and be open. Begin with one step, moment to moment. Envision the journey, your process. Allow and be open. Begin with one step, moment to moment. Envision the journey, your process. Allow and be open. Begin with one step, moment to moment. Envision the journey, your process. Allow and be open. Begin with one step, moment to moment. Envision the journey, your process.
Y'all can hear this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Allow and be open. Begin with one step, moment to moment. Envision the journey, a process.
All right, everyone, that's the end. Any questions, follow up with Dr. Dent. And yeah, we'll see y'all at 1:30. Thank you so much again. Bye, everyone.